Lily Edmonds Tucker. In this program, Lily Edmonds Tucker explores the impact ancient African cultures had on world history and what African Americans can learn to better their own lives. Africa of today is in some respects a shimmering light of its scientific and historical past reaching back thousands of years. Lily Edmonds Tucker believes that by learning of Africa's past, African Americans will receive inspiration for the future and develop a true sense of self-esteem. And now, Warriors of Wisdom.
How would you like to be able to use your automobile to travel on land, on the water, and in the air? What would you think about people who could use the power of their minds to create the energy to operate their vehicles in this manner? No motors, no batteries, no gas or oil. What would you think of people who use the power of their mind to develop the energy to light their homes and cities instead of the power company? People who had energy machines to use for the healing of the body or the mind. People whose telephones were from mind to mind without the need for the phone company. People whose television was mind vision. They could view anything they wanted whenever they wanted. These people had no need for jails or prisons because they had an energy machine for their law-breaking citizens, which immobilized their personal power until they mended their ways. Wouldn't it be great if parents could use such a harmless machine for their children who are out of control long before they get into more serious trouble? As far as advanced technology is concerned, these people had the mechanism and the speed for their rockets for space travel that is still beyond our comprehension. Were these people in your past? Is it worth your effort to find out? We're fighting racism as best we can, but we're not using the personal power in our lives that our ancient foreparents in Africa used in their lives to win their battles. Many of us now realize this as we study our past of thousands of years ago. We know now that we have lived in ignorance of our glorious past because this information has been purposely withheld from us and from the rest of the world. This ignorance has been to our detriment. This ignorance has been the cause of our downfall. There are other ways of thinking and other ideas about being human than those we know about here in the Western world. While we African Americans and our brothers and sisters in Africa struggle for total liberation after hundreds of years of oppression, many of us are finding that the history of our past and the knowledge of the power that our ancient ancestors experienced is very important to us. We know that there is much more hidden about African wisdom and power than we presently know about. Africans created many concepts in human development which have become the basis upon which many of today's arts and sciences are founded. Did you know that Africa was the cradle of civilization and culture, and that Africans built the greatest civilization the world has yet to equal? Yes, this is saying a lot about people who are now experiencing such a low time in their history. But authentic, ancient African science and technology has now been documented. African science and technology is a fact of life that occurred long before Europeans invaded Africa. What can we do with this information about our past? There's an old African proverb: when you walk in your father's footsteps, you learn to walk like him. We African Americans can learn from our past how to access this greater personal power and take control of our future. It seems, based on what our ancestors knew about their personal power in ancient times, that today we know little or nothing. We are like another African proverb: some people's eyes are other people's mouths. In the absence of the knowledge of our past, we see and know only what we're told here in the Western world. Our foreparents attributed their personal power to a natural gift from the Creator that each of us bring with us into the world. It cannot be taken from us. It can only be stifled or forgotten. Based on what our ancestors were able to accomplish in their lives, there's a part of us missing, a power that lay asleep within us. What power is this that you and I are born with? How do we experience this power, you ask? We are discovering the answers to these questions as we study our past. We know that we do not need to join any organization or embrace any religious dogma or creed in order to open up to this personal power. In teaching how to experience this power, our ancestors gave the world the greatest directive for self-empowerment that the world will ever receive, and that was, know thyself. In other words, look on the inside to solve the problems on the outside. Does this sound strange to you? Of course it does, because we don't know about the power our African ancestors possessed. With this kind of power, we can take control of our own lives in spite of what others do to keep us down. What a task for the glass ceiling black people go up against daily. If we were aware of how to use this great inner power, racism would be the oppressor's problem and not ours. We will overcome our dilemma when we've learned to follow in our foreparents' footsteps, and we've learned to develop this power. Self-knowledge is power, and ancient Africans demonstrated this by building an authentic, scientific, and technological culture that the Western world has copied extensively. Yet now we ask others to do for us what they were able to do for themselves. Because of their knowledge and use of their personal power, they led the world in building a great civilization thousands of years before there was a Europe or a United States. Africa built a civilization that was great, it was powerful, and very advanced in technology. For starters, Africans learned how to live without war. They reached a state of consciousness where they lived without war in one period of 4,000 years. Not only without war, but even without a revolution. Look how many wars we've had in the world just this century. With many books today about Africa's great achievements, many African Americans still do not know about their great past. They are like the people in a story I heard. There was a little town in Texas where there were two ice houses. The white man's ice house and the black man's ice house. All the white people went to the white man's ice house for their ice. All of the black people went to the white man's ice house also. A visitor came to town who observed this And he asked the black folks why they didn't buy their ice from their black brother. Guess what their reply was? The white man's ice is colder. Is this the way many of us feel about our African heritage, which preceded the so-called Greco-Roman civilization by millions of years? Ancient Africans, through self-knowledge, developed the first in many features found in society today. They had the first democracy, the first alphabet, the first writing, pen and ink, the first calendar. Just think, they developed the domestication of fire over 1 million years ago. They developed the domestication of animals, agriculture, steel smelting. They had an observatory to study the stars. They had a glider airplane. Did you know Africans had their own political and taxation system? That they taught the world trial by jury? That they had judges and courts? They had universities that were world-renowned. One university in particular was the University of Jen in the Songhai Empire, which employed a staff of thousands of teachers. Listen to the courses that were taught: astronomy, mathematics, medicine, hygiene, philosophy, logic, diction, elocution, rhetoric, and music, to name a few. Does this sound like savages swinging from tree to tree? Africans had hospitals, surgery, and medical techs. There was national and international trade, and they even had a stock market. How did they develop something that was the first of its kind when there was no model to copy from? This was the result of self-knowledge, a source of knowledge from within that can never be used up. Can you even think of yourself having energy at your disposal that is more powerful than the sun, that has no limit and can never be used up? Why can't we African Americans learn to develop this power today to affect the change we need to build our communities? Isn't this one important reason why we should study how to reclaim our African past? That we should study to learn about a source of power within us lying unused because of our ignorance, or because others don't believe in such a thing? How do we access this power? We harness this power with our minds. Does this sound like science fiction? Or unbelievable? Or impossible? Remember the ice house mentality. Can you believe that our people could possibly have developed any science or technology? According to a recent report, a professor at Stanford University is using a mystical exercise handed down by our ancient foreparents as a tool for self-empowerment for his MBA students. Surely we African Americans can research, study, and apply African wisdom and knowledge in our lives. Just think, if we knew the power of our minds, racism would not stop our progress as it does today. Our African philosophy is that when any idea or thought of others becomes an action that harms us, we must develop an idea or thought that is equally as powerful, and we can stop such action. Can you think of using the power of your mind to bring about change in your life? We don't have to accept where we are in life if we choose not to do so. We can change any circumstance in our life when we learn how to use our inner power. Our ancestors left us the directive, know thyself. And they left the blueprints to follow to do this. In comparison with what our ancestors attributed to the human being, we are using only a small fraction of our total ability. There's a part of us fast asleep within because of our ignorance. We must question, challenge, and investigate the belief system we presently hold to be the truth. We must question, challenge, and investigate all other belief systems presented to us as truth. We're not learning about our past from the non-black world because of their sense of a false national pride. In order not to concede to the true history of our past, non-black historians and scholars would have us think of our past African culture as legends and fables instead of it being historical, documented facts. But they cannot deny the fact that in ancient African civilizations, there was no juvenile delinquency. Crime was rare, and Africans knew how to raise their children to become honorable adults. Couldn't we use some of this knowledge to take care of the violence in our communities, to stop the incarceration of our black young men in our jails and prisons? Our black young men think that there is only an American culture. They need to know about their African culture and its success story so that they will have a source of identity. With this knowledge, couldn't we do something about the drugs that destroy our communities? Because of the lack of information about who we are, where our people have been, and therefore where it is possible for us to go, there is much helplessness and hopelessness among us. The ancient African culture that raised the ancient African people to such heights of glory was not a product of any religious dogma, creed, or theological tenets in the world today. We can follow our foreparents' teaching to know thyself and learn how to use the power of the mind, even if such an idea is so unbelievable we think it impossible. Behind every great empire are great people, and great people are the product of great minds. African Americans have great minds. They just don't know their power. This reminds me of the short story about two frogs. These two frogs, hopping here and there, leaped over into a pail of milk. One of the frogs tried with desperation to jump out of the pail. After becoming exhausted from so much effort, it turned belly up and died. The second frog decided not to give up, but instead it kept on paddling and paddling, knowing that it didn't want to meet the same fate. After much paddling in the milk, the frog felt a hard lump under its feet. Looking down, it saw a lump of butter. It stood on the butter and leaped out of the pail. Developing our own personal power from within will happen if we are determined for it to happen. We must be determined to pursue such a course, knowing that our power will grow in the trying. We may not know all about our past and the wisdom of our ancestors, just as the frog didn't know churning milk makes butter. But we can still get started on our way, using our power on the inside to solve our problems on the outside. Shouldn't we do something about our circumstances? Hasn't our efforts failed to bring us the total liberation we're seeking? How do we stop the destruction of our communities, the incarceration of so many of our young black men? Hopefully we won't have the ice house mentality, but instead be willing to reclaim the power that was once experienced by our ancestors. Without money or prize, without prestige or membership in any organization, we can use our minds independently of any outside force to lift us up to higher levels of consciousness and self-empowerment. A formal education is great, and it's in order, but it is not the totality of a good education. In spite of the African Americans with BAs, MAs, and PhDs, the latest now is that on the IQ scale, blacks are 10 to 15 points below whites. Only those blacks who know their history can begin to refute such a statement once and for all. The statement of the authors of the book, The Bell Curve, about black people and low IQs will not hardly stand up as a statement of fact with most people, white or black. But how will it affect the subconscious minds of many black folks? For African Americans to offset such mentality and take command of their lives, they need to do two things. One, become aware of their power within. Two, begin to use it. Though such ideas and tasks seem overwhelmingly difficult, an individual perseveres to a certain point, everything moves exceedingly fast thereafter. So much understanding about ourselves has been lost from our minds, even our knowledge of the power of our thoughts. We simply mirror what others are thinking and telling us, and we think that is all there is to our thinking process. First, we must lift the cover the Western world has placed over the world of the inner self. We must not be afraid to admit our previous ignorance, for fear our prestige may be impaired. We will need to set aside many of our cherished ideas and buck the academic pros and cons of those who proclaim themselves experts or specialists or guardians of the highest intelligence. We must come to realize that we have been asking the wrong questions. We've tried to get rid of the things we don't have in the first place, and we're continually begging for power we have already, if we only would use it. What can we hope to gain in reclaiming our African heritage? If we're willing to listen, and if we're open to new directives, we will find a new, deeper, hidden, and invisible dimension of strength and power within. We'll learn how to draw upon the powerful essence of life, and doors will begin to open to changed conditions and circumstances. In areas where all else has failed, we will break into a new society instead of waiting for the old society to give us a break. For African Americans to know their past glory and their future glory was the aim of one of our great black leaders of this century, Marcus Garvey. His program was about installing in the minds of African Americans that what a people have done in the past, they can do again. Marcus Garvey was the most flamboyant, dynamic, and temporarily successful exponent to black power ever to appear on the American scene. He was the first black leader in American history to capture the imagination and loyalty of the black masses. He was the first to profoundly stir their racial pride by asserting that black too was beautiful and that theirs was a strong, proud race with its own exciting history, tradition, and culture. The Marcus Garvey movement of the 1920s became one of the most phenomenal social movements in modern history, and his name is one of the best known both within and outside of the black world. Even though he did not succeed in his specific goal, his memory and his movement remains a powerful source of inspiration to black nationalists, both in the New World and in Africa. To know our past and the power our ancestors experienced should raise in us the desire to do the same thing. We can take control of our own destiny. We can learn how to know the self. And we must use the power on the inside to take care of our problems on the outside. You have just heard a lecture on African spirituality. I've offered some notes on our African past and for your food for thought. There is so much more to learn. I will hope you will do some research and study on your own. I believe when we African Americans learn more about ourselves, our past history in Africa, and then only will we be able to exchange helplessness and hopelessness for inspiration, aspiration, and a renewed sense of dedication toward a life experience our ancestors enjoyed so much. Thanks for sharing this time with me on Warriors of Wisdom. I'm Lily Edmonds Tucker.